A drugged-up Prime Minister. Police brutality erupts amongst the crowds. A deranged stalker surges towards the Queen, driven by dangerous obsession. And a comedy of errors from the clergy leaves the service in disarray, and Queen Victoria herself is injured during the ceremony. This was no flawless display of regal precision. This was the coronation of Queen Victoria. As midnight fell on the 27th of June 1838, London was alive with noise. Under the glow of lanterns, the streets buzzed as a strange carnival of dwarves, giants and albinos slumbered in Hyde Park. Booth owners pinned flags and banners to their stalls, and monkeys shrieked and strained at their leashes tied to carts and poles. The bells of St. Margaret's Church, near Westminster Abbey, rang until 1 in the morning, much to the frustration of London's exhausted residents. By dawn, thousands began moving through the streets, seeking the best viewing spots. Many were half drunk from coronation parties, staggering towards Westminster without having slept. Hackney coaches were being rented for exorbitant prices, and foreigners were charged double. Thousands of hopeful travellers found themselves stranded, unable to find transport into London as every train and carriage was packed. In the poorer quarters, barefoot children danced in the streets, their ragged clothing fluttering as they sang "God Save the Queen" into the early morning. In the wealthier neighbourhoods, elegantly dressed women climbed onto specially erected platforms, their places lined with richly coloured carpet and embroidered hangings, waiting for a glimpse of the young Queen. Charles Dickens, before becoming a celebrated author, worked as a journalist and was assigned to cover the event. He described a world alive with people, 400,000 of them sleeping in the streets, eager to witness history at daybreak. This frenzied excitement was exactly what the government desired. The coronation was intended as a kind of pressure valve for the public, a grand spectacle to release social tension and lift national spirit. Cynics within the government also took comfort in its modest cost, roughly $6 million in today's terms, compared with the staggering $18 million spent on George IV's coronation. Inside Buckingham Palace, Victoria was awake long before dawn. She had barely slept, haunted by a premonition that something very awful was going to happen. At 4 o'clock, the first 21-gun salute thundered through Hyde Park, rattling the windows of the palace. She buried her head under her pillows, hoping in vain to block out the sound. She remained in bed, unwilling to look outside until 7, when she finally peered through her window at the surreal sight of masses of people climbing over one another to get a better view. Though the night had brought heavy rain, the moment the sun broke through the clouds, the crowd erupted into cheers. Victoria was anxious. She had never attended a coronation before and had little idea what to do. Thomas Carlyle, a prominent intellectual of the age remarked, "Poor little queen. She's at an age when a girl can hardly be trusted to choose a bonnet for herself, yet a task is laid upon her from which an archangel might shrink." When Victoria stepped into her carriage at 10 o'clock, a single gun boomed in the distance, signalling a departure. Sailors rushed to hoist the royal standard, and across Hyde Park a theatre owner struck a gong, prompting showmen to unfurl their banners in rolls of flashing colour. The state coach, drawn by 8 cream horses, shimmered as it rolled through the streets. Composer Felix Mendelssohn, holidaying in England, described it as golden and fairy-like, supported by tritons with their tridents and surmounted by the great crown of England. Victoria tried to take it all in. The faces jammed into every window, children perched on rooftops, men gripping chimney pots, the cheers crashing like waves. Their good humour and excessive loyalty were beyond everything, she later wrote. But the joy was not universal. In Whitehall, Victoria's carriage stalled, and she noticed police striking people with their truncheons to clear the way. She intervened immediately, insisting that no excessive force be used. Mendelssohn, watching from the crowd, was horrified by what he called unnecessary brutality, and by the hordes of drunken women, one of whom screamed, "Coronation!" as police struggled to restrain her. A man nearby seemed unsure whether to use the carrot or the stick, attempting to calm her with jokes before lightly boxing her on the ear. The streets outside were teeming with spectacle and madness. Among the throng, a determined man battled his way toward the Abbey, intent on proposing marriage to the young queen. Captain Thomas Flower, a former army officer, had already caused several disturbances in his pursuit of Victoria's hand, including an attempt to gain access to her private box at the Italian Opera House. He dismissed all concern with a statement that left no doubt as to his delusion. "I am merely a candidate for the hand of Her Majesty." His persistence earned him a swift sentence, not to the Tower of London, but to Tothill Field, a house of correction where he was committed as insane. Meanwhile, Hyde Park had erupted into full-blown revelry. Nearly 1,000 booths sprawled across 50 acres, filled with beer, music, and chaos. Within hours of the fair opening, a woman working at a gingerbread stall went into labour. The baby, born among the scents of sugar and spice, was promptly named Hyde Park and became an instant attraction. Visitors, enchanted by the coincidence, brought gifts for the newborn, and the stall remained open for days after the fair ended, drawing curious onlookers eager to see the infant born on Coronation Day. Elsewhere, tragedy struck amid the celebration. In one of the crowded dancing booths, a 23-year-old man collapsed and died. The official cause? The visitation of God. The phrase, a common euphemism of the time when medical knowledge was less advanced, lent an eerie air to the incident. One moment, he had been reveling in the festivities, the next, he was dead. And then there was the pig-faced lady. Among the many oddities on display that day, including twin giantesses, spotted boys, and living skeletons, this particular attention drew one of the largest crowds. The reality, however, was far from what the showman promised. The so-called lady was, in fact, a bear, its face and paws shaved to resemble human features, dressed in a bonnet, white gloves, and a lace-trimmed shawl. The poor creature was strapped into a chair and prodded with a stick by a hidden boy whenever a paying audience demanded to see it respond. As Hyde Park's festival reached its frenzied peak, another procession was unfolding. Nobles in velvet and lace, diplomats in gilded carriages, and bishops in embroidered capes made their way toward the Abbey, stepping over discarded streamers and remnants of the night's revelry. Among them, the Austrian ambassador, Prince Esterhazy, was covered entirely in pearls and diamonds, even his boots encrusted with gems, which observers described as glistening like a galaxy. It was two Londons colliding, one drunk on celebration, the other solemn with expectation.
From rebel queens to modern-day scientists, from survivors to spies, told by 3 women and 1 man, queens and heroines.
When Victoria stepped forward, the Abbey erupted in applause. 8 train bearers followed, all unmarried girls in silver and white, with pink roses in their hair. When the Queen caught her first glimpse of the brilliantly illuminated Westminster Abbey, she visibly caught her breath and turned pale. The sheer scale of what lay before her was almost overwhelming. Towering Gothic arches rose high above, their intricate stone tracery softened by the flickering glow of thousands of candles. The light caught on the faceted diamonds and polished gold of the assembled nobility, scattering tiny shards of brilliance across the vast chamber. As the weight of history bore down upon Queen Victoria, her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, struggled under a burden of his own making. Suffering from an upset stomach, he had dosed himself generously with laudanum, an opioid commonly used as medicine, and washed it down with brandy, a remedy that left him woozy, sentimental, and entirely unsteady. Draped in his heavy robes and gripping the 3-foot-long sword of state, he stumbled through the grand proceedings. While the Queen moved through the solemn rituals, the drugged Prime Minister leaned in and whispered, "You look like you are floating in a silver cloud." It was a remark as dreamlike as his state of mind, and Victoria, ever composed, gave no sign she had noticed his intoxicated reverie. Benjamin Disraeli, the sharp-eyed politician and future Prime Minister, later wrote to his sister, "The want of rehearsal was very obvious. Lord Melbourne, looking very awkward and uncouth, had his coronet cocked over his nose, his robes under his feet, and held the great sword of state like a butcher." He added further observations on the day's disorder. "The Duchess of Sutherland stalked up the Abbey like an ancient Roman goddess. Lord Lyndhurst failed to back away properly from the Queen's presence, and Lord Ward, after the ceremony, was drinking champagne out of a pewter pot." As peers stepped forward to pay homage to Victoria, the elderly and frail Lord Rolle attempted to climb the steps to the throne. Halfway up, he stumbled and fell. Prompting satirists to joke, Lord Rolle was rolling. Gasps filled the Abbey, and for a brief moment, time stood still. The Queen, just 19 years old, reacted instinctively. "May I not get up and meet him?" she asked, concerned and ready to step forward. When no one answered, she took matters into her own hands, gracefully stretching out her hand to help Lord Rolle as he struggled to rise. The Abbey burst into applause. However, the dignity of that gesture was short-lived. What followed was a catalogue of errors that threatened to turn solemn ritual into farce. The Archbishop of Canterbury was visibly flustered. At one point, he lost his place in the service and began reading the litany too soon, throwing off the rhythm of the ceremony. As Queen Victoria sat in the grand St. Edward's chair, awaiting the next phase of the coronation ritual, the Archbishop approached with the coronation ring. This ring, an essential part of the investiture, symbolized the sovereign's union with the nation, an emblem of divine rule and unwavering duty. However, in keeping with the day's many blunders, what should have been a straightforward moment turned into another mishap. The ring had been specially crafted to fit Victoria's little finger. Unaware, the Archbishop attempted to slide it onto her fourth finger. Victoria immediately realized something was wrong. The ring was far too tight. She whispered her concern, but the flustered Archbishop, determined to proceed, pressed it down forcefully. Victoria winced, but there was no stopping it now. The ring was wedged tightly in place. For the remainder of the ceremony, she bore the pain in silence, her finger throbbing beneath the weight of the ill-fitting gold band. Only hours later, when the long service finally concluded and she retired to the robing room, was she able to seek relief. The ring had become so tightly lodged that she was forced to soak her swollen hand in ice water for half an hour before she could finally pry it off. Throughout the rest of the ceremony, Victoria often had to whisper for help, unsure of what came next. When she was handed the heavy golden orb, she hesitated and whispered, "What am I supposed to do with this?" The clergy had no immediate answer. It was only then that someone realized it had been given to her too early. and the bewildered archbishop simply wandered off in confusion. When he returned for the crowning ceremony, he lifted the heavy jewel-encrusted crown and a hush fell over the abbey. For all the confusion that had plagued the day, this was the moment of absolute focus. The crown descended onto Victoria's head, its weight both literal and symbolic. The echoes of "God Save the Queen" boomed through the vaulted ceilings as outside cannons fired, trumpets blasted, and Hyde Park cheered. But the clergy weren't the only ones struggling to keep the day on track. As the service lurched forward, the noblemen soon proved that even those well-versed in courtly decorum were not immune to calamity. During the homage, each peer was meant to lightly touch Victoria's crown as a gesture of reverence. However, many of them were far from gentle. One clutched the crown outright, while others bumped it so forcefully that it gave her a headache. Luckily, her crown had been fitted tightly, or it might have fallen off entirely. Meanwhile, her train bearers, meant to move in perfect sync, failed spectacularly. One later confessed, "We carried it very jerkily and badly, never keeping step as she did, even and steadily, with much grace and dignity, the whole length of the abbey." Two of them were heard giggling and whispering as though they were at a ball rather than a sacred ceremony. As the ceremony drew to a close, the traditional coronation medals were distributed among those in the abbey. When the treasurer of the household began tossing them into the choir and galleries, a scramble ensued. Maids of honour, dignitaries, and even clergy were seen lunging for the medals with reckless enthusiasm, causing an undignified commotion. But the day still had one last embarrassment to offer. The bishop charged with reading the official liturgy lost his place and skipped 2 entire pages of the service. No one intervened, and the coronation continued as if nothing had happened. Victoria, following the cues given to her, was led away to St. Edward's Chapel, where she was to be briefly secluded after the crowning. Moments later, someone realised the mistake, and the Queen had to be hurriedly recalled to complete the service properly. Only after the corrected rite had concluded was she led once more to St. Edward's Chapel, this time for the true conclusion of the ceremony. The small, dim chamber tucked behind Westminster Abbey's high altar was intended as a place of solemn reflection after the anointing and crowning, a sacred retreat before her final ceremonial departure. But when Victoria stepped inside, she was met with a scene that could hardly be called holy. The chapel looked more like the aftermath of a feast than a place of worship. The altar was strewn with half-eaten sandwiches, empty bottles of wine, and discarded ceremonial regalia. Clergy and courtiers had evidently taken advantage of a rare moment away from the public eye, abandoning their hurried meal amid the sacred setting. Among those who wandered into this unholy spectacle was the Prime Minister, still dazed from a heady mix of laudanum and brandy. Spotting a full glass of sacramental wine, he drained it in a single gulp and carried on as though nothing were amiss. As she proceeded out of the abbey, holding the heavy orb and scepter, her people roared their approval. After nearly 5 exhausting hours, she returned to Buckingham Palace, where she immediately rushed upstairs, not to rest, but to bathe her beloved dog, Dash. For Queen Victoria, animals were not merely pets. They were lifelong companions, offering unwavering loyalty in a world often dictated by duty and formality. Later that evening, the Prime Minister reflected on the day's absurdities, a theatre of missteps playing in his mind. And yet, through it all, the young Queen had carried herself with dignity. He leaned back with a weary sigh. "You did it beautifully, every part of it, with so much taste," he told her. Victoria smiled, though she must have known that her reign had begun chaotically. That night she stood on her mother's balcony, watching fireworks illuminate the sky with a massive glowing image of herself in Coronation Road. In her diary she wrote, "I shall ever remember this day as the proudest of my life." For now, the night ended in celebration, her image glowing over London. But the glitter of the coronation would fade, and the true test of her reign was only just beginning, as a scandal soon followed. Subscribe to discover more fascinating tales of Queen Victoria's reign.
Now it's your turn, viewers. If you could add one completely ridiculous tradition to a modern coronation, what would it be? Leave a comment. We will feature the best comment in a future video.